Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. And today we're getting into another hobby of mine. And previously I got into a couple of hobbies that I was interested in, things like watch collecting, and I got into and I mentioned about photography that I was into, and just in general how it's important for you guys to have a hobby and get into something. So one other kind of thing that I wanted to get into that I always had an interest in and would kind of play around with and dabble with is writing, and in particular world building. And if you were ever in that space where it was something that you were ever thinking about, then this is definitely one of those things that you guys can get into. So for those who, like I said, ever wanted to get into this, we're just gonna kind of just freehand right now, just kind of play around with a few things and just kind of like show you guys ways that you could kind of, I guess, enhance that skill, or if you've never been into it, just kind of ways that you can kind of see how it works or whatever the case is. So this is just really kind of a fun, carefree video, really, for the most part, but just kind of really expanding on the notion that we've mentioned before on the channel, because like on the channel, we always try to speak on things like positivity and growth and all those other things, besides for now jumping into more current media as well. But we're still going to always hit back on some of those old things and old concepts of the channel. And so hobbies was always something that I've always pushed forward that you guys should jump into. So I've always been into world building. I've done a lot of it in the past, and to me it comes pretty easily. But for those who specifically also too want to go into the realm of storytelling, now I've never been great at writing stories, but if you have been and you ever had trouble with the world building process, maybe this could kind of help you out in that regards. Don't mind that the only way I kind of know how to do this, I don't know how to do like screen share or any of that kind of stuff. So it's just pretty much just what I'm typing off of my off of my laptop is the only way I kind of really know how to do that. So what is world building? So world building is pretty much the creating of the foundation of a story. Now, this, for those who like to write stories, this is obviously a big component of it. And what's interesting is it wasn't that long ago that I had a conversation with a new friend who was into that same space of writing. We kind of connected off that, and we're just kind of sharing concepts and ideas. And one thing we kind of came upon was the fact how you have a lot of people sometimes who are really good at storytelling and not good at world building. You have a lot of people who are good at world building, not good at storytelling. And I'm not really great at writing stories, because that in itself is a skill, besides for not to say knowing how to tell a story, but to actually write a story, when it comes to the components of how much detail you're going to put versus how little detail and whatever the case is. But anyway, so jumping into this space, that is what world building essentially is. World building is you creating the foundation for the, I guess you could say, like the playground that you're gonna, or your canvas that you're gonna kind of lay out or create a story on, if you want to even go that far. Or you might just enjoy the hobby of world building without actually going further than that. And that could sometimes consist of you making like bios of characters, like little written details of different areas, whether it's a place on a planet or maybe it's multiple planets or whatever the case is. So it all kind of can fall into that space of whatever the scope you want to bring it. So yeah, so just for those who kind of want to kind of use it, especially for those who want to use it for writing and maybe they're not very good at that, hopefully this will kind of help out a bit. So let's just kind of play around with some things. Let's see about creating our own world off the top of our head right now. And I'm going to obviously, as people, we always sometimes gravitate towards things that we may have previously created to some degree. But I will definitely create something on the spot that is completely unique. Some thoughts that I've actually had in my mind recently in regards to actually this project of, just kind of recording and doing something like this. So we could do with a couple of different ones. So let's do like a fantasy world building really quickly. And then we're also going to maybe do something like we can do like a space world building as well. So let's just kind of play around with that. So, and later on too, you guys could end up doing things like using this to, maybe write books. You can create books on Amazon for free if you want. So that's another thing. So as far as we're going to do fantasy world, fantasy, we'll just say that, fantasy world structure. Okay, so what are we going to do here? Well, we're going to make things a little bit different than what your conventional one is. So and what I mean by that is a lot of times too, we're going to always gravitate towards certain fantasy elements that are like normal, but the way you could kind of change things up. And when I say that, think Lord of the Rings and things of that kind of sort. But we're going to change things up a little bit here because I like always twisting things to be a little different than what is conventional. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to come up with a couple of races. So let's say elves, dwarves, giants, humans. And sometimes when I do humans in like these kind of worlds, I like to call them like neo humans, because like they're not going to be like regular humans type, even though they are regular humans, but it's just a way of saying like they're not from Earth, they're from wherever this place is, but it doesn't matter. In this case, we're just going to write down humans. We're going to go with lizard men, lizard people. And merfolk, which I did one time in a world that I was creating, and I actually took a different spin on it, and I thought it was just very interesting because a lot of times people might have a group that is more closer to human for it to be relatable, but I ended up going the route of making them less relatable and trying to make it where they connect with human or bipedal type of creatures through the method of having to integrate the structure of their life, and not that they themselves were bipedal, because they wouldn't be. So, that was interesting. So we're going to go with that for now. If we think of any other ones, we're going to add on to it. So we are going to come up with, now it depends on the order that you want to do things. We're going to create a place. So we're going to call this location. I'm feeling something with like a G, like grand. And I'm looking at my plant right now, so we're going to call it Grand Plana. Grand Plana. There you go. That's going to be our plant. That's going to be this location. How about that? Let's see here. Grand Plana. Grand Plana is of various types of environments. Environments include deserts, large forest, mountains, and large cities. Cool. That's just to give us a little scope, and we can add on to that later on whenever we feel like it or we want. And so let's dive into these races, to some of these different races. So we're going to start with elves. Elves. elves are humanoid figures, long pointed ears, and are generally more lightly built than normal humans. Don't mind if I have like any kind of spelling errors or anything like that, whatever the case is. I'm just going off the freehand. A lot of times I'll usually use my dictionary to correct any of my spellings or things of that sort. But right now we're just kind of going at a fast pace just to kind of give you guys a sense of how this is. So let's see. I like to usually deeply describe things because it just makes it easier for you guys to kind of, it sets a tone, it sets a setting. So elves are humanoid figures that have long pointed ears and are generally more lightly built than normal humans. Elvish race has evolved into So I had a thought about trying something totally new. It's going to be very interesting for the concept of, I was thinking about this before coming up with this. It's very different, something I've never done before when it comes specifically to the elves. So do I want to do 3 types of elves, or do I want to do, yes, elvish race has evolved into 3 types of elves. The dark elves, the forest elves, and the we're gonna make up this word, Numerian elves. I'm gonna try to find out if Numerian's even a word. I'd never heard of it before, but I felt like I'm making it up. Okay, I tried to look it up, and it's not a word, so it's cool. It's a word we're making up. And the Numerian elves. So, what we'll do is start here. We're gonna start with actually the forest elves. We're gonna go in a different order than what I posted them up here. So, yes, elves. First, we're gonna elves go like that. Obviously the structure, you guys can play around with structure. I'm not trying to be too picky about things like structure right now, but yeah, so let's see. We're gonna start with forest elves. Forest elves. Forest elves. The original elves that started off many generations ago. All elves primarily live in forest until the division of their lines. The forest elves are nature. Okay. So forest elves are the original elves that started off many generations ago. All elves primarily live in forests until the division of their evolutionary lines. Forest elves are simple people who live off the land and are one with nature. Most of these elves have, let's see, have maintained their let's see, maintain their, what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say that they are probably the most physically capable of the elves. So most of these elves have maintained their physical capabilities in regards to being tough and stronger than your more domesticated elf species. Yeah, we'll just do that for general, just to get the point across. And so we can expand on that if you want to make a world that has magic and say these ones have a lot of a deeper connection to magic, but we're not going to go into that at the moment. So what we're going to now do is the Numerian elves. I'm going to save the dark elves for afterwards. Numerian elves are elves that began to mix and mingle. Numerian elves are elves that began to mix and mingle with humans, not just on a bloodline level, but culturally. This has caused them to lose some of their, what's the word I want to use? Some of their strong, distinct elvish features. This has caused them to lose some of their strong, distinct elvish features and cultural ways. Okay. So these would be, I guess you could say, as I'm making them right now, as I realized to myself, what they kind of are the equivalent of is half elves. And I didn't even really realize that as I started making them. But that's kind of, I guess, what they would be considered then. So that's interesting. But instead of calling them half elves, we're calling them Numerian elves. Yeah. So, and if a person wants, you can go on a deeper level of saying, are they even like respected in the lands with humans? Are they accepted? Maybe they aren't, because they could be frowned or looked upon in a negative way. But definitely within the realm of the elves, they might definitely be looked upon in a certain way. So we're going to add that. Among all the other elven species, they are looked down upon because they have strayed so far away from their natural ways and appearance. Just to give us a sense of that. Now, dark elves. Evolve to a level of evolved from living in caves. Dark elves have evolved from living in caves and hidden caverns underground. Okay, this has caused them to have black skin and white hair. We're going to go with the conventional dark elves look. But what we're going to add to that is something else. Culturally, they have surpassed all the other elves because they had focused on what's the words I'm looking for? Focused on their architecture, essentially. So what's happening here? What we're gonna do this twist here is they essentially became like dwarves, but they're like elven dwarves, not in bloodline, but in the aspect of if you're in caves or you're in dark caverns underground, what starts happening, you start building your structures into the land, similar to the way dwarves do. And at that point, you start thinking in the way that you build as well, which is very calculated and very grand. So that is what we're kind of going to go for here. Culturally, they have surpassed all the other elves because they had focused on building very deep, for lack of a better word, detailed structures for their living grounds. And this led to a higher form of thinking and culture. They now live in grand structures that are considered what's the word I'm looking for? Something that's prestigious, considered, we'll just use that word then, very they now live in grand structures that are considered very prestigious and gigantic in scope and size. Now they no longer live just in underground caverns and mountains, but they have learned the art of building structures. Oops, I am sorry you guys. You guys were not able to see what I was doing anymore. So let me just adjust that. And then I'm going to read that whole thing through after I'm done typing it up. No longer covers the mountains, but they have learned the art of building huge structures. Become the successful elvish race, elvish species, and is admired by all other species, all other races, and there. So dark elves have evolved from living in caves and hidden caverns underground. This has caused them to have black skin and white hair. Culturally, they have surpassed all the other elves because they had focused on building very detailed structures for their living grounds, and this led to a higher form of thinking and culture. They now live in grand structures that are considered very prestigious and gigantic in scope and size. Now they no longer live just in underground caverns and mountains, but they have learned the art of building huge structures. They have become the most successful elvish species and is admired by all other races and species. So that was a twist, because most of the time we think of the dark elves as the bad ones and whatever the case is when it comes to things like certain fantasy media. I don't know if they exist in Lord of the Rings, but I know they exist in certain things like, say, Dungeons and Dragons, that type of media, and they would be known as like the Drow, I think, or something of that sort. If I have that name correct, you guys correct me down in the comments. And so this spring takes a different spin on it based on them being in the shadows, building structures in those environments, in a harsh environment, and then evolving from that to become even better. So now we're going to do dwarves. Let's see, are small in their size, often built very strong and dense. Dwarves, and this is going to be a spin that I thought about years back, never put it into kind of any kind of, world building, but I always thought this was interesting. Dwarves are along, let's see, descendant of giants over time. In certain parts of the world, giants could not sustain in certain environments based on resources for their size. So some subgroups evolved to become much smaller, to survive in much harsher resource deprived locations. This is how the dwarves came about. And the reason why I thought about this a couple many years back, maybe about like 3 years ago or 2 years ago, was because dwarves look like giants to a degree, but just small. And I just thought, wouldn't it be kind of cool if they would just evolve from that same thing? So we're not obviously going to put them in the same bloodline as giants because they've evolved so much differently, but this is what they are now. And so we're just going to kind of go off that basis and just kind of put like where they mostly live. Dwarves tend to live in mountain locations. Mountain locations, but some live in desert locations as well, where resources are low because they have adapted to being able to do so. So this is going to now kind of be a thing that kind of goes hand in hand with their lore in this world that we're building. Dwarves are able to survive in places that other creatures can't. Maybe they require less water, maybe they require less food, things of that sort, because they're smaller and that's how their bodies evolve. Slow metabolism type of thing. They can eat and then kind of survive off that for a long time. But obviously, we can go into more details later on. Little caveats like they are a group or a race that will work hard, but if they need to go into a more hibernated state, they can slow their body metabolism down and just, not be in this kind of aggressive, industrial way of working like they normally see them do, and kind of go into a space of like shutting down. It's just something that they can do, similar to if we just were fasting or something of that sort. So we're just gonna leave that at that with the dwarves. So they're not gonna have multiple versions of them, but they are very adaptive in terms of resources and being able to survive certain environments. So we're gonna now do giants. Giants have evolved into, well, first let's start with their stature. Giants often average a size of 10 to 15 feet tall, just to give us like a little basis. They evolved into two subgroups. Giants often average a size of 10 to 15 feet tall. They have evolved into two subgroups. So, and I played around with this idea once before, and I just thought it was really cool. You have savage giants, which are the ones nightmare stories are told of. The ones that attack and eat anything smaller than them. Then you have what's the name we're going to give these giants? These are going to be called these are going to be like more royal. They're not going to be savage at all. And these will be known as we'll call them celestial giants. Celestial giants. Yeah. The ones that then you have celestial giants. An evolution in which they have taken a higher path beyond the barbaric nature associated with giants. And so here we will do savage giants. They often live in forest, mountain, and occasionally dry areas, but not for long, as they are not able to sustain in resource low environments. Savage giants have small brains and tend to be very primitive in nature. Primitive in nature, they often are, let's see, then do not, they often, what's the word I'm looking for? They often live a nomad life and do not stay in large groups, as they tend to not get along very well because they fight over resources. Obviously food and things of that sort. And we're just going to leave it at that for that. and then celestial giants. At some point, a group of giants began to evolve after establishing culture. They realized as a species they were superior to other smaller species. This allows them to use their size to do things other species and races could not do, such as build larger structures that were what's the word I'm looking for? Monumentous. I don't know. That were because the video's dragging out. I'm just gonna say that were grand. Obviously, you guys can use more fancier words if you need to, such as build large structures that were grand. In addition, they were able to upscale all their basic living ways, such as, I'm having brain farts, my brain's getting tired now, so don't mind the type of words I use here. In addition, they were able to upscale all their basic living ways, such as harvest. Let's see, what's the word I'm looking for now? And reserves of resources, so they could go longer times thinking and growing in their ways versus always hunting and gathering. As my mind is deteriorating now because I'm just in that zone, but you guys get what's being spoken on here. So there are not many of them that exist, but the ones that do live in a grand city that has walls as high as 30 feet tall. Nobody is allowed in without permission, and they look down upon smaller creatures. Obviously, these are referring to intelligent creatures. So I'm not going to go into heavy detail with it, but I'll just explain simply that they get to a point where, they're just superior creatures. And once they realize that, they don't have to live this savage life. They can build monumental structures that would probably take hundreds of men to do. They can do it with just a handful of them, so they start doing so. Once you realize you're the top of the food chain, the top of anything, you can start living that life the way us humans do in our modern world. They started doing their world, but everything of theirs becomes greater. And we'll say the only other group they respect are the dark elves. because like I said before, the dark elves were forced into a space of evolving because of the conditions that they were in, as far as like living in darker spaces, and then eventually hostile environments causing them to evolve in that way. So that is the giants. And now let's do the lizard people and then the merfolk. So lizard people, you can come up with a cooler name for them, but that's what we're coming up with now. They're not going to have any kind of necessarily subspecies per se. Lizard people live primarily in wetlands or deserts. Though they have not evolved into subspecies, they do live in drastically different environments and have adapted to do so. This is to stay away from conflict with other species, though they are welcome to trade in other cities and towns. They are often not liked by many other groups. So they're kind of like the outcast group. They are humanoid in appearance, but have a tail. And scaly skin. Scaly? Is that how you spell scaly? Yeah. They have built cities over marshland for those that live in that environment, and small castle-like structures for those that live in desert land. Because I'm thinking of those kind of lizards that can kind of be in the desert. So like that's kind of where they have adapted. I won't call it a full evolution, but once they've lived in those areas for long enough, their bodies have adapted to maybe retain, hydration longer. But I won't call it a full-on evolution the way like some people who get adapted to things long enough are used to things, certain conditions, but they aren't necessarily a whole new species. So it's kind of like that. And then so they have like, little buildings that are over marshlands. And then you'll have certain small castle structures that are in the desert. So nothing too grand because they don't have those grand building skills. So they're little kind of castle kind of structures. Think more in line of like similar to a sandy type of clay material built in the desert, similar to like something you'd have in like Star Wars, like Tatooine or one of those kind of places like that, or Navarro or something like that. But they won't be super tall. They might be at best 2 stories high. They don't really have the resources to build super big, but they will be this kind of stony clay material looking castle-like type of structure. And then now the merfolk, and I did this one time, merfolk, with another iteration that I used of them, which I thought was like really cool. And first we're going to describe how they look. Merfolk are humanoid in appearance with the exception of that they do not have legs. Instead, they have long fin tail structures. They have many underwater cities, but none as influential as let's give it a name. We're not going to go with Atlantis, because Atlantis seems to be the name of everything. Let's see. Artreus. That's what we're going to call it. Influential as Artreus. I spelled that wrong. Artreus. We're going to add another R there. Artreus. And the autocorrect is trying to change the name. This is a large hybrid city in which you have large building structures that are as tall as 2 to 3 stories high. But the streets are waterways. This accommodates the merfolk who cannot walk but hop on solid land, and the sidewalks for humanoid people to walk on. The city of Artreus is a city of trade amongst the surface world and the water world. People come from far and wide to have access to the rare resources that the merfolk have access to deep under the seas. So that is a place where they kind of come together. So the merfolk are not made in this this particular world that we built up to accommodate humans in any way. It's not like that. They have to have a place where they meet, because otherwise they just can't exist. And I know a lot of times for the place for things like the conveniency of making things cater to humans, we would want to do things like build our merfolk to be kind of like, I think his name was Abe in Hellboy, where he's got hands and he's got feet, but he's got like webbed feet, webbed hands, because it allows it to be like, yeah, it's more convenient for humans that he can interact with humans. This is a little more real world, where if you had merfolk, their best evolution for being in the water would be like, as far as an intelligent species, would be like mermaids, you know, as the best that we could think of, you know what I mean? As far as like, sure, maybe they could be evolved like sharks, but then, you know, that would be something totally different. So, but the point is that this gives that balance of, that's what they'd be. They need their fins to be able to swim fast. They're not going to be like Aquaman, or how like people would have the whole species of Atlanteans where they're humans who just live underwater. That's not efficient, and it doesn't make sense. So when we're making fantasy world creatures, you really do want them to be somewhat grounded in some kind of evolution, because it doesn't make sense. Unlike superhero worlds where you can make up whatever you want, and you can do that, you want these to kind of make a little bit more sense. So in this case, this makes sense, and that is how you have them combined. So think of it as, I don't know if that's Italy or wherever that is, where the streets are waterways, but it would be like that. So this is a full list of our species that we have come up with. And we're gonna stop there because I'm not gonna drag out the video too long. But if you guys are interested in this kind of stuff, I'll expand on it and we'll get more deeper into this kind of stuff. So just kind of let me know. And yes, another little tidbit too that I've experimented with. So some people kind of go into the space of using AI to help them write stories. And there's a guy who has a channel called, I believe it's the Nerdy Novelist. I could be wrong, but you could look that up on YouTube. And he kind of does this kind of stuff a lot. And what's interesting is I kind of played around with the idea because I was thinking about that in terms of things to kind of help out with writing. So I wanted to play around and try something. And one day I had took a world that I built up, very similar to this one, as a fantasy world. And I took all the elements of it. I took the land, the locations of the lands. I named all the lands in it. It had places in those lands, like different areas, like the whatever desert, the forever forest, and all these kind of different things and stuff like that. Big cities like the six southern kingdoms, whatever the case is, all part of different lands and stuff like that. And I put it into an AI with all the world building I did, similar to what you see here, but it was, you know, even more stuff. And it was able to generate stories. Now, I would never make a complete false story out of nowhere, but what I realized, if you guys are interested in this, is that you're able to create a world. And you can check out some of these channels out there that do that, but get into that space of world building, create a world. And then from there, if you needed help with your chapters or maybe structuring, whatever the case is, with your material, you can take your entire, copy and paste your entire world you built, drop it right into the AI and tell it, make me a story. And there are certain prompts you can do, like things like style, and you would write that like style and maybe like parentheses afterwards or something like that. And you make categories for it to do, prompts for it to do. But then when you go the basis of the world, make it within this world, and there's the world structure and whatnot, then you would copy and paste all the world that you just built, and it will know that stuff. So that's something you guys can get into if you are interested in that. But if not, you just want to do your regular story writing or just world building for the fun of it, you can do this. It's a great pastime just to kind of get your mind into other spaces that sometimes helps you relax or whatever the case is. So like I said, let me know your feedback on this. If you guys are interested in this kind of stuff, you guys wanted to see me do more stuff like this, let me know. You guys take care. And as always, like, share, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.